What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Golf 360 podcast. I'm the host, Pete Popovich. So you may be asking yourself, what is Golf 360? And Golf 360 is a show that was designed to introduce you to people associated with the game of golf to help you improve not only at your game, but also your life. Almost all of our guests are from within the industry in some way, shape, or form, but some of the guests we have are from outside the industry, and it mainly revolves around the business world with a few others scattered in here and there. Now, all of the guests that we have a few things in common. One, they all were highly successful and accomplished in their field. Two, each has something to pass along that will help you in your game and your life. And three, they were all more than willing to give back by passing along the things that they use to help them in their career, and even some of the mistakes that they made so that others don't make them in their journey. So I hope you find listening to them as enjoyable as I did interviewing them, and that each and every one of you benefits from the information that they so willingly and graciously pass along. This podcast is brought to you in part by Just Thrive Probiotic. You may be surprised to learn that your digestive system is the key to creating and maintaining the quality of your physical, mental, and emotional health, and it's one of the body's most essential systems. That's why the majority of nutritionists today highly recommend probiotics as an indispensable nutritional supplement. As a discriminating consumer, you've probably been searching for a probiotic that is proven, potent, and effective, and you found it. Just Thrive is your best choice for maintaining a healthy lifestyle. Just Thrive Probiotic captures the power of hundreds of thousands of years of nature's design with a specialized bacillus strain formulation that guarantees survivability through the stomach and upper digestive system. Supports optimum gut health, digestive health, immune health, and delivers antioxidants. Great for adults, kids, and the whole family. Use promo code GOLF360 at www.thriveprobiotic.com for 10% off your... This podcast is brought to you in part by Old South Golf Links. A short ride across a bridge from Hilton Head Island is one of the area's finest golf courses and a hidden treasure. Set up on towering pines and ancient oaks with sweeping marsh vistas, truly makes Old South Golf Links a one-of-a-kind golfing experience. The Clyde Johnson design was named one of the top 10 new public courses when it opened, and it also takes full advantage of the natural beauty of the Low Country. Old South is a fun and unique challenge for golfers of every skill level and a favorite of both locals and visitors. Whether it's your first time here or you're a regular, you'll be treated and feel like family. From the bag drop to check-in at the fully stocked pro shop with both men's and women's apparel, to breakfast or lunch before or after your round, the staff is always ready and willing to help. Experience for yourself why Old South is one of the premier golf courses in the Hilton Head area and why it will quickly become a favorite of yours too. Visit them in person or online at www.oldsouthgolf.com, or to make it tee time, simply call the pro shop at 843-785-5353. Okay, everybody, I am very, very pleased to announce today's guest is Dr. Greg Haff, who is the professor of strength and conditioning at Edith Cowan University in Australia. Dr. Haff, thank you very much for making the time to join us today.
Thank you for having me. Look forward to an interesting conversation.
Yes, I've had my challenges with getting this tech side right for doing an interview halfway around the world, both longitudinally and latitudinally. But I think we've got it down. I've got my fingers crossed.
We'll see how it goes. I hope it works out.
Let me jump in. Cause you have a long history of education and working yourself kind of as your I'm not going to say it was your hobby. It was maybe more of your passion, the strength conditioning world, and you learned under some very, very well-known people and so on. And you worked obviously with Tudor Bompa, who when you wrote the book Periodization and Theory and Methodology of Training. But when you were younger, what was the attraction to the strength and conditioning world?
Well, I think for me, I started out actually had motor skills learning problems, and I was actually in special ed physical education as a kid. Mm-hmm. So I actually started out in gymnastics. I was put there to actually try to improve my motor skills, which it did. I actually went on to be a pretty good athlete. But my father was a Marine, and as part of his ethos, strength training was a requirement. So at the age of 11, I started to strength train with him every morning, just because that was something that he believed in, and then it becomes something I did throughout my teenage years to backfill for track and field and football, which I participated in, as most young males do in the United States. And then always lifted, 5 days a week, 6 days a week, all through my teenage years. Got to college, wasn't playing football anymore, and was running track and field for East Stroudsburg University. And one of the coaches there wanted me to get a little bit bigger and a little bit stronger, and introduced me to Olympic weightlifting, and then was talent ID'd by York Barbell as a weightlifter, and then kind of just went from there. So I was really just interested in lifting weights. It was something I did with my dad, and it was something we did together for many years. And then it's just part of who I am. I've always trained. Very rarely do I not train. It's kind of a standing joke at the NSCA. When I was president, they had to schedule in lifting time no matter where I was in the world, and coordinate that for me. So I tend to bring my lifting shoes with me everywhere I go. I actually have an extra pair that is my travel pair. Very similar to some of the greats. Keo Häkkinen from Finland is the same way. He actually brings his lifting shoes everywhere he goes, and as does Mike Stone. So good company to be in. But for me, it's kind of a microcosm of life, the weight room. So when I was in college, I really wanted to be a strength coach. That was what I had intended to do. But then ended up working with Mike Stone and saw something a little bit different and went a little bit different path. I still strength coach on a regular basis, but it's not my main focus at the moment as far as professional outcomes.
Are you focused more now on the research, or is it the educational portion? What are you into now? Because I know you have such a vast array and knowledge on all things related to the topic.
I actually think all those things are interrelated, in the sense that my core philosophy is really centered around the fact that if I'm doing research that doesn't impact applied practice, then it's not worth my time. So in order to understand what applied practice wants, I have to be engaged in applied practice. So I actually still coach 6 days a week here at Edith Cowan University. I mean, I mainly coach weightlifting, but it's still strength and conditioning in some aspects. And I do sometimes coach with sports teams and stuff like that where I can. It's a little different here because we don't have college sports. When I was at West Virginia University, I used to go over to the strength facility and spend time there and engage with the strength coaches, and sometimes help with sessions, and just to stay connected to the profession. So I've always tried to do that wherever I've been. Over here, it's a little bit more challenging because we only have professional sports. And I used to do a lot of work with what a rugby team called the Western Force, but they folded a couple years ago. So we actually don't have a rugby team in Perth anymore, a legitimate rugby team, a professional team. So I still coach. I do a lot of research, and I teach because I think it's important that research is disseminated and taught to students so that they can use it in their applied practice. So I'm trying to balance all three. It's a challenge in modern academia now, because there's a big drive to find money, and to drive money being the driver for what you do. For me, I don't do that. I get in trouble a lot for that. For me, it's about ideas and trying to improve professional practice.
Would you say you're doing, aside from the teaching and helping people train, more research and development in the field?
I think what we try to do is we engage with coaches to find out what they're interested in, and then try to answer questions. So, for example, let's say, a coach is interested in velocity-based training and how to best apply it. We may try to unpack that whole construct to determine, A, does it do what people say it does? And B, if it does, can we improve how it's used? If it doesn't, why doesn't it? And then we can inform the coach of that, and then the coach can make decisions about whether or not they want to employ said technology. Currently, I'm actually working a lot more in the military space or the tactical space. Mm-hmm. I'm actually engaged with the Australian Special Forces, or the SASR. So I actually have students that are embedded there with the combat groups. That's actually probably at the moment my biggest passion, being that it has a personal connection, being that my dad was a combat Marine, and then I was not in the military due to an injury. Actually, if I hadn't injured my arm training for the Olympics, I probably wouldn't even be in academia. I would have been in the Marine Corps. Um, the that construct is a little bit different because what we're trying to do is save lives, and we're trying to find better ways to train the soldier to be more resilient, more lethal, and more healthy in this construct of being able to engage in combat situations around the world. And that's been an exciting change of events for us over the last 9 months. It's probably the most meaningful research I'll ever do because it has direct ramifications in life and death. So I think it's pretty cool. It's definitely something we enjoy.
Oh yeah, it sounds very cool. I hesitate to ask you to describe more about it because I would have to say if it's special forces, it's got to have some type of top secret type stuff that you're working with.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Somehow I've been able to gain clearance to the Australian military, and they've invited me. I haven't sought them out, so I think that was a real compliment for me as a person, I think. And I have a doctoral student and a master's student who are embedded. Basically, we're just doing really cool work that they drive. They ask questions, we find answers, and I think we'd love to do it in the U.S. With the U.S. military specifically. I would love to do stuff with the United States Marine Corps someday, just to pay homage to my father. But we don't talk a lot about what we do. We're just doing it because they are. It's all secretive, and in fact, most of the staff at ECU know that we do stuff with them, and the soldiers come at off hours when they come to campus. Most of the stuff's done at Campbell Barracks, so we're pretty excited about it.
That's awesome. But very happy for you that you're getting to do something that's so passionate about and make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the key. It's not about all the papers you get or things of that nature. It's really the people that you impact, and I think that's the important message.
Outside of your dad kind of getting you started in training, who were some of the people who helped you along, maybe mentored you a little bit?
I think I always share this story. I think I probably wouldn't be a college professor or a researcher or in sports science if it wasn't for Dr. Andy Fry. I actually met him at my first weightlifting meet when I was 18, 19 years old in Allentown, Pennsylvania. I actually was taken there by one of the track coaches to lift in a competition and in the off season. And Andy was sitting next to me, and I remember Arn Kritsky coming out, who was an Olympian from 1988. And I was like, why the hell am I here? This guy's a monster. And Andy tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, my name's Andy Fry. Don't worry, you'll beat me. And he was pretty friendly, and he was studying with Bill Kramer at Penn State at the time. And we became friends, and he came down to East Stroudsburg University where I was doing research with Frank Pulo in a collaboration with Bill Kramer. And he taught me a lot of things, and he happened to introduce me to Mike Stone, Bill Kramer, Kyle Pierce, John Garhammer, Everett Harmon. We're talking some of the icons in the field at the time. And it was rather interesting because Mike wanted me to come do my master's with him. John wanted me to do my master's with him. Bill Kramer wanted me to do my master's with him, and Kyle Pierce was the same. And I chose Mike mainly because he was living closest to where my girlfriend was, and it was kind of an interesting thing. And Mike and I have been close friends ever since 1993, and he's kind of like a father figure to me, and a lot of my ethos comes from my father, who was that Marine Corps kind of construct of work ethic and integrity and things of that nature, and then Mike Stone's scientific integrity of doing the right thing, not chasing fame. He's really passionate about that. So I think really Andy Fry is probably the person that got me moving in a direction, but I don't think any one person is built on their own accord. I think the people that you get the opportunity to work with really lift you, and it's your kind of duty to lift them as well. So I mean, I did my strength and conditioning coaching under Meg Stone, which was a great opportunity to work from probably one of the greatest strength coaches of all time, and one of the, as far as women goes, one of the real ceiling breakers. She was phenomenal to work with. So it was a really interesting time for me to study with Mike on a science perspective and to work with Meg on an applied perspective. And they're very different in their approaches, or at least they were back then. And it was just a really nice model. Meg was a really, really good strength coach that could get people to do things. And Mike was really very cerebral. And that was a really interesting mix of times for me. And then I think probably the other person that probably has influenced me the most is my wife, actually. She's a pretty groundbreaking strength coach in and of herself, in the sense that she has no training in sports science whatsoever. Her specialty is actually French literature, but she's actually one of the best strength coaches I know, because she looks at things in a more personal, communication, holistic way. She understands the science, but not the vernacular. Mm-hmm. And she's one of only 13 women in the world that the IWF has accredited to train weightlifting coaches. And I think that's a real testament to her.
Yeah, 13 in the world. I mean, 13 out of how many billion?
Yeah, so I'm pretty proud of her, and she actually is someone who challenges my beliefs and my thought processes, because I think one of the challenges as a scientist that I see, not only within myself but those around me, is that the lab is not always the actual real world, and the real world doesn't always work when you try to apply the lab in it. And I think a lot of times we'll be struggling with a construct in the lab saying, okay, how can we solve this problem? And she'll be working out and just turn around and go, well, this is easy. Just do this, this, and this. And 99% of the time it works perfectly because of years of being in the trenches of coaching various people. She actually started with high school kids, and that's where she honed her craft with those kids. And then she was actually handpicked to replace Meg Stone at Appalachian State as a strength coach, athletics coach, which is a testimony to her abilities, that they would pick her as Meg's replacement when Meg moved to Scotland. Mm-hmm. And then when we came to Australia, she was the first woman to be a head strength coach in professional netball. And she actually worked for probably the most famous netball coach in the history of the sport in Australia, a woman named Norma Plummer, who I often say that she's kind of like the John Wooden of netball. So the two of them worked very well together for a good amount of time. And so her ideas actually sometimes blend into mine, and we have many, many, many conversations about training and how to improve people and different ways of looking at things. So I think it's a composite of different people, and all the different grad students that I've had the pleasure of working with as well. They all bring something different to the table as far as experiences or viewpoints that make what we do grow. So I mean, I think that's important, that you have to have people around you to bounce ideas off of and kind of grow your own mindset. I mean, there's things I do now with training that I wouldn't even touch 20 years ago. So, I mean, I think it's just something that's an evolution, and you keep moving forward and growing. But the foundation really starts with my father, Andy Fry, and Mike Stone, really.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you brought up when you guys were working on things that were in the lab, so to speak, and then trying to apply it, let's say real world for generic purposes, or generic language. I'm sorry. And where you mentioned your wife kind of bridged that gap and how to do it. I find that a lot in the golf industry, where whether it's somebody's teaching a swing off a biomechanics study, or they're doing a club fitting using electronic measuring devices and so forth. And the big kick in golf the last, I would say, 10 to 15 years has been a gravitation towards science, which I have always said is a great thing. Some of my contemporaries say, well, you bang science. I say, no, I don't. I think it's a great thing. But I think there is also theoretical science, for a lesser degree, or lack of a better word, and then there's the applied science and how it works in the real world. And there is a chasm that needs to be crossed between the two, because you can't force somebody into doing something that they're not capable of doing.
Oh, absolutely. And I think so for me, there's good sports science and there's bad sports science. And I don't want to go on, a podcast and say that, mechanistic sports science is not useful. It's extremely useful, but oftentimes when we do mechanistic sports science that is very controlled in the lab, it just completely loses its ecological validity in the world of sport. And I think that's a challenge. It's a battle I face every day at Edith Cowan University because there's a lot of people here that are mechanistic sports scientists. For example, I mean, I can use this example. So when I look at hostage rescue or SWAT team or special forces room clearing in a combat zone, if you look at what they're doing purely biomechanically, you would say it's completely wrong, and the typical sports scientist would say they have to change it. However, when you talk to these individuals who are extremely experienced and have survived Iraq and Afghanistan, they will tell you that they can't do it that way because they're going to get shot in the leg or get shot in the femoral artery, which is, could be death.
Mm-hmm.
So it's biomechanically incorrect, but some of the biomechanics people that I work with would fight that and say that we have to change it. As my construct is, you're the expert at that. I don't know how to fight in a combat zone. That's not my thing. You tell me why you're doing that and let me understand. And then we work from that perspective. And so it's tactically sound, mechanically unsound. So what do we have to do? Figure a way to make that more physically sound. And the same thing, for example, in sport, when I work with, let's say, a American football team, an NFL team, the technique that you're trying to use is tactically what you need to do. So how do I make the athlete stronger, more resilient to be able to do that technique? And I think a lot of sports scientists, especially young ones, don't understand that their role is not to tell the coach what to do. Their role is to inform the coach of things that they can make decisions about. And I think that's the challenge that we have in preparing sports scientists, because they often will get this mindset that they know more than the coaches. The coaches know what to do. We're just trying to understand why and help them make it better. One of my favorite books is by Steve Ingham. And it's about training champions, and it's his journey through the English Institute of Sport and his work with elite athletes there. And it's called Supporting Champions, and he talks a lot about that. The fastest way to lose coaches and athletes is to go in and tell them what to do, as if you know more than them. And I think that's one of our profession's biggest challenges, because from a scientific perspective, a lot of us, not myself, but most people tend to think, oh, I know everything and I'm going to impart my wisdom on everyone. And I just think that's a poor practice for sports science.
Mm-hmm. Did you plan on reaching the level that you've achieved? In other words, was it a goal, or did you just do what was in front of you and follow? Next thing you know, you're world class?
That's a good question, because I don't actually perceive myself as world class or actually perceive myself as accomplishing anything. I kind of I connect really well with Jimmy Radcliffe, who also says the same thing, because that's not what it's about for me. Awards and recognition is nice, but it's not what I am searching for. I'm on a journey to be a better me, and to find answers to questions. And Mike Stone used to tell us that science is the search for truth. And that's what I'm looking for. Is I've always had this desire to be the strongest person I can be. And that's it on a multitude of fronts. Obviously in the weight room and in being a strong athlete, that's always been something that's important. I also want to be strong in my faith. I want to be strong in my conviction and strong in my ethical values. So for me, it's always been this search for strength. And I remember the first time I touched a barbell, it felt like it belonged. And that's my space where I am the happiest, is in the weight room. And I'm finding now that in the military environment, I'm also probably equally as happy. So it's this quest for truth, and it's not about being famous. It's never been about that. I actually find sometimes that a bit uncomfortable, because I just am a guy who looks at how to be strong and how to improve performance. It's not like we're saving lives or cancer or solving the major issues like that. So I do find it somewhat humbling. I do appreciate people's respect and people liking the work that we do. We strive to just do it the best we can. And we look back and we see things that we've done and we're like, I wouldn't do that now. But I think that's just getting older and becoming more mature. I mean, I've always tried to be the best I can be at anything. I mean, my father used to say, if you're not going to do it to the best of your capacity, why are you wasting your time? And I think that's important. There's a quote in James Mattis's book that I love about the Marine Corps. It was basically the construct is that you have to that the Marine Corps doesn't accept less than 100%, but they also do not accept a lack of skill and preparation. So I think for me that's kind of fits with what my father taught me as a young man. You have to just do the best that you can, and if you've given everything you have and you're not successful, that's okay. But if you can look in the mirror and say, I haven't given everything I can, then you have to take responsibility for that.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it was never an intention. I never had a roadmap to being successful or being, even being president of NSCA, I never even thought that was a possibility. It was just opportunities in front of me and taking opportunities when they appeared, but always having a core philosophy, belief, ethos that underpins the decisions that I've chosen to make. And I think, you can't do it without the support of your family and the people around you.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. If you don't, I used to think, I used to watch a biography channel many years ago, and they would have, for example, like Millionaires Week, where they had Rockefeller and they had Steve Jobs and they had all these highly, highly successful people. And growing up, I always thought, wow, these guys did all this stuff by themselves, which was completely wrong, right? You never realize the support and the people who are around you that you have to have help you to achieve anything. It doesn't matter if you're trying to bench press 300 pounds. You got to have your friends around you urging you on and encouraging you, because there's a lot of failure involved. And I never understood. I thought everyone just did everything perfect, and those who did it the most perfect were the highest achievers. Life isn't like that. Completely opposite.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the challenge that you have really is, especially nowadays, there's just a lot of opportunities in front of you and choosing, which ones do you want to take? I got invited to go to China this week and to speak at an internal conference that a lot of strength and conditioning professionals around the world are going to. And I chose not to go due to some internal things at ECU that I need to take care of, and some grad students that needed my presence here on campus, and some things with my family. And there is always that fear of missing out, but it just wasn't a good timing for me. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I have a good working relationship with the Chinese, so I'm not afraid that I won't be invited in the future. It just wasn't the right time. And you can be stretched too thin very easily and overcommitted. And I think I often am in that space because I am very dedicated to the people that are my colleagues and friends around the world, and often volunteer to help them, probably when I shouldn't, but I will because of the commitment to people that I respect and care about. But I also think as we can never stop learning. I mean, recently at the International Conference of Strength Training, I had the opportunity to spend a little time with Dietmar Schmidt-Bleicher, who is one of the iconic people in our profession. And it was very interesting talking to him as people were presenting and they were excited about these ideas that were brand new to them. And Dietmar was like, well, we did that in 1979, or we did that in 1995. And it was so fascinating because it was like standing next to Mike Stone as well. And recently I started to look at accentuated eccentric loading and doing some work with Paul Comfort and a really exciting young researcher named Melissa Harden. She's going to be a rock star down the line. She's just amazing. And Dietmar had done some stuff in that area. And so we've been corresponding. And the thing that has always struck me about the greats like Dietmar Schmidt-Bleicher and K.O. Hakkinen and Mike Stone and Bill Kramer and Andy Fry is that they never don't take the opportunity to share with other people. If you ask them a question, they're always going to engage you, and that's something that I learned a long time ago is to do that. So when someone asks me a question, I always try to take the time to respond as soon as I can. If I'm at a conference, I always answer questions that people have or share information, and I think that's the only way the profession grows. If we don't do that, it's not a contest of who's got all the knowledge. It's really about helping athletes achieve the things that they want to achieve.
Yeah, I would agree. It's the same thing in golf instruction, because there's so much out there to learn. If anyone cops an attitude or gets a little too cocky, it's almost like they're excommunicated because no one wants to deal with them, and you can't learn any. There's so much involved in whatever field people are in nowadays, with the internet and the advent of sharing information, that there is no way that I don't think any single person could learn everything in their profession to be the undisputed champion, so to speak.
Well, and that's the challenge right now is, Stone and I talk about this a lot because he's actually pretty anti-social media because he believes that it's a dissemination tool for false information. And I tend to agree with him because it's really difficult for people to figure out what's true and what's not true. And, I probably am one of the last generations that actually went through the more classic way of learning, in the sense that if you wanted to become good at something, you went and studied with a master. And the master taught you their way and taught you how they did things, and then you evolved from that training. Now we have a lot of generation, we see it in our classes a lot, that they will see something on the internet, in social media, and almost take it as the gospel because it looks a certain way, or it's got a reference, or it's published, and then when you start to unpack the article that this social media has promoted, you start to realize that there's flaws in the article, or there's misinterpretations, and the younger generation has got to be trained on how to filter that noise, and that's the challenge, because sometimes things look amazing on social media, and you're saying, oh, that's the answer, and that challenge becomes problematic. A good example, there was a paper published by Mladen Jovanek in the Australian Strength and Conditioning Association journal on using velocity of warm-up sets to predict the 1RM for the day. And at first glance, you start to be like, oh, this is great. This would be awesome, because then we would be able to dial in on actual capacity to lift on that day. And you look at the science that underpins the idea. It's okay, velocity, as we lift heavier things, velocity gets slower. This kind of makes some sense. It's kind of a linear relationship. And we did a study on it, and we found that predicting 1RM from warm-up sets over predicts your maximal squat by 20 kilograms. That's problematic, because we actually did the actual 1RM on that day and determined, oh crap, this is problematic. And then what we found was, to get an accurate prediction, you had to get almost to your 1RM, so you might as well just max out, which is it's not going to help us, because we know that you can't max out every day. So that's an example of, it's a good idea, a good theoretical idea, but in application doesn't really work. And we're still unpacking that, because we're trying to look at it in different ways. But to be honest, I don't think it's going to work. So on social media, you would see velocity-based stuff is the answer, da 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 da. But as we start to unpack things, it's not as clear cut as that.
What's a typical day like for you?
Typical day like for me. Again, I'll highlight that I grew up in a Marine Corps family, so early morning is important. I usually get up around 5 o'clock. I'm in the gym by 6 with my wife. We usually train from 6 a.m. till 8 together. And we've done that. We've been married almost 20 years now, and we've trained together for 20 years. We were both competitive weightlifters. She was far better than I was. And so we do that. It could be weightlifting. It could be metabolic conditioning. It could be movement competency training, some form of training almost every day. Then from about 8 o'clock till about noon, I am in my office. I teach mostly online right now, which is somewhat unfulfilling. I like the technology side of it, but I like to be with students.
Human
And
interaction, yeah.
that's been my challenge in Australia is it's a different college model. I kind of miss the United States, but anyway, um, so I tend to work in my office. I usually block a couple hours a day to work on student projects, like for example, reading dissertation proposals, reading articles, and trying to improve that. Spend time in the afternoon working on my own stuff, such as reading, um, organizing data collection, student meetings. I've become more of a manager of people now. Then I don't really spend a whole lot of time collecting data myself. I will with the military because of security clearance issues. We only can take so many people to the base, and so I'll be in the trenches, which will be exciting and rewarding because I do like data collection. And then at night from 5 o'clock to 8 o'clock, I coach weightlifting. And then usually from about 8:30 to 10 o'clock, I read leadership books or books about how people do what they do. I just recently finished Jim Mattis's book, which I thought was exceptional. I'm reading Clapper's book at the moment. I tend to read a lot of military leaders' books.
Mm-hmm.
I just connect with that. I really love Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willenick and Leif Babin, and the dichotomy of leadership. Stanley McChrystal's stuff was quite good as well. So I tend to read a lot. That's pretty much every day, even on weekends. That's just kind of how I live at the moment. I do spend a lot of time lately. I'm writing a new book on periodization by myself, and taking it a different direction. And then I tend to travel to conferences pretty frequently, but generally that's my schedule. I tend to like a very regimented schedule. I tend to do things very methodically and planned out just because that's, again, that comfort zone for me.
Yeah, you can't change who you are, right? No matter how much you research and try to. Did you ever read About Face?
No, I haven't read that
Hackworth?
one. No, I haven't read that one. I could definitely research that. It's really interesting. I tend to read a lot of different things. Lately, I've been reading a lot of stuff by ex-military people like Navy SEALs, and I enjoyed David Goggins' book a lot. I found that very fascinating. He's an interesting character.
I got About Face from listening to one of Jocko's podcasts. That was Colonel David Hackworth.
Okay.
I don't want to spoil it for everybody else. They can go listen to Jocko. I don't want to intrude. I don't want Jocko mad at me by any means. But yeah, that was a very, very interesting book.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'll tell you the other thing I do like. Sometimes I go for walks just to clear my head. I really like Michael Gervais' Finding Mastery podcast. That's to me like on my number one podcast listening list, mainly because I think a lot of things that Michael talks about and his people that he brings in talk about is this idea of finding mastery in yourself and whatever you do. And I think that's something that connects with my ethos. By no means have I achieved mastery or have I even gotten close to it in my mind. There's so much more I need to get better at. So I'm always striving to improve. Every day I wake up with the mission of improving something about what I do or who I am.
What's say some of the craziest things you see in your industry? You're like, wow, what I don't know where the hell they came up with that.
I don't want to.
You don't have to single anybody out.
Yeah, I don't want to single anybody out, but I mean, one of the ones that I've seen lately, and I just sit there shaking my head, is this idea of doing a power clean into a step up. I just cannot grasp why, because really to do a clean or an Olympic lift well is a skill in of itself, and doing it into a step up makes no mechanical sense to me and no practical sense to me. And scientifically, the rationale doesn't make sense as well. So this idea, the thing that I'm just scratching my head about lately is this, what we're calling over specificity of training. The idea that the weight room has to be perfectly mirroring the world that we compete in really is kind of a false construct in my mind, in the sense that the weight room is a place where we build capacities that underpin performance, not where we do the performance, unless we're a weightlifter or powerlifter, that is. So this idea is somewhat strange to me, because truly, if specificity is to that degree is so important, then we should just wear weights and do the sport.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that's not 100% the best. We can't really do that, So I struggle with that at the moment, this idea that we're trying to mirror movement patterns in the weight room to the nth degree. And we look now and we see a lot more injuries now than we did 15, 20 years ago. And people try to make the argument that sport is faster, but when you start to look at the results, it's not overall. For example, the 2000 Olympic rowing team for Australia did a basic 1RM back squat 50 to 60 kilos more than the 2016 team on average. And the 2000 team won. The 2016 team didn't. I mean, that's just the basic metrics. And so why have we gone away from, large mass ground-based exercises in some aspects of our profession to more of this single joint over specific kind of movement patterns, yet we're not getting the same performance gain? I find that interesting, because when we look through time, it seems to go in cycles. And right now, for example, the flavor of the month is velocity-based training.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if we look back in the 90s, the flavor of the month was power training. And it didn't work for the long haul, and I suspect velocity-based training won't either. But if you think about the physics of it, what is power training? If we know the force application is pretty constant, power training is actually velocity training. So really, we're just repeating something we did in the 90s, just calling it
repackaged.
Yep. Yeah. And so after the 90s, it became, oh, no, we need to go back and get strong again and lift heavy things and do things that we've always done. And I suspect we'll see that trend come back again. Nothing is really that new or novel. I mean, if you think about it, there's a physical culture text from 1845 where they talk about planking and kettlebells. Well, we talk about planking and kettlebells now. So I think the tools are there, and they've been there for many, many, many decades. And I mean, you think about it, like we've done work on cluster sets. And what people don't realize is that the genesis of the ideas with cluster sets came from muscle magazines in the 1950s and Verkhoshansky in the 1960s. All we've done is just gone in and looked at it in a more scientific way and tried to unpack it a little bit more. So I think it's important that people know the history of their profession, because there is a lot that's been done in the Soviet Union and around the world, and it's really a global research world that we have to dive into. And just because it's not been done in modern literature in North America doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Yeah, and that speaks to, I want to get into your book. I know it's a few years old now, and it's not as well known maybe as it should be outside of the training circles. But the periodization theory and methodology book, yeah. I was blown away by it, and I just had trained for professional golf, but I'm like, wow, I wish he was still around here. When I was playing, it would have been fun to see how to train to peak at certain times. But from my understanding, and I could be way off, but you got to work with Tudor, and hopefully we can talk about him a little bit, but he had information going back to the Russians in the 50s and 60s, and then from the Bulgarians back at let's say the turn of the century in the 20s and 30s. Is that way off base, or am I somewhat right on track?
You have to look at, like, it's interesting. Tudor is probably the most famous, and to be honest, I didn't really work much with Tudor. I actually rewrote the whole book myself. He didn't do very much because he struggled a little bit with the modern science. And we had some major times where we just didn't agree on things, and I'm like, well, you can't say that. It's not scientifically right. You just can't say it. It was proven wrong. It was right in the 60s, but it's not right now. So when you look at the periodization history, you could go back to the ancient Romans and Greeks and find discussions of basic planning of training. But the Soviet Union, the communist countries, really did the most. And a lot of people talk about Matveyev, Bompa, Bondarchuk, Verkhoshansky as like these are the guys, you know. The guy that actually everyone doesn't think about is a guy named Laszlo Nadore from Hungary. You have to remember Hungary was under the Soviet control. Everything goes to Russia. Laszlo Nadore was single-handedly probably the mastermind of the excellence of the Hungarian sport machine in the 1950s, because he helped with all the planning. And the kind of people that studied with Laszlo were people like István Balye and things of that nature, which is really fascinating. And for me, I only know about him because Mike Stone was friends with him. They had met each other, and one of Mike's most proud pictures is he has a picture of him with Laszlo Nadore, and they used to talk a lot about periodization of training. So the idea here is that the Soviets actually put a lot of emphasis on sport, and if you read Matviev's book, which everyone should, the first chapter is really about the importance of sport in communism, basically. And they researched a lot to try to improve performance. And this is where I get kind of fired up. But there's some researchers out there right now that are frustrating as all get out, that suggest that periodization is unnecessary and that you don't need to periodize training. And they're very loud speakers in social media, and they write commentaries and never offer an alternative and don't do research in the space. And they really discredit the work of in the Soviet Union and in Romania and Bulgaria and in Hungary from that time as not being scientifically sound. But the reality is those people were able to do research on a larger population than we would ever be able to get. In fact, Matviev's dissertation had something like 250,000 people in it.
Cool.
You're not going to get that, because what he did is a cross-sectional study looking at how different people trained in the Soviet Union and figured out what were the characteristics of those that did really well versus those that didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the genesis of periodization. And when I was actually partnered with Tudor Bompa by Human Kinetics, actually. It was never the intent for me to write with him. I was going to write my own book because that's what they wanted. But then Tudor came out of retirement. So when I started down that journey, I thought it was important that I read the historical stuff, because if you don't know where we were, you don't know where we're going. And we can take comfort in the past to inform the future. Jim Mattis recently did a speech in New York City where he actually talked about a speech that Lincoln gave that was really quite applicable to the current political climate in the United States. So looking back to look forward. So in periodization, that's what I've tried to do, is I've always tried to look back at the greats and read their work. And even when I've had to get things translated, there's German work that I've had to have people translate for me so that I could understand, what they've done. And a lot of times what we see nowadays is that people assume or make really broad assumptions that work was not done well. And in reality, it was done quite well. And it's just not published in a format that we're used to now. Mm-hmm. It's usually published in compendiums and things of that nature, and books, not peer-reviewed journal articles, because it just wasn't what they did at that time. I mean, if you look about it, even Einstein's stuff was in compendiums. So that's really where periodization, it's really just a construct that they were able to find in trends, and then they built from there. So I think it's really interesting, and they each come at it from a different approach. If you look at Matviev, he has one approach. Bompa has another approach. Verkhoshansky has another approach. Bondarchuk has another approach. Nadore has another approach, but the base principles are the same.
Can you just enlighten some of the listeners that might not know what periodization is?
So for me, and this is something we're working on right now in the book that we're writing for Human Kinetics that we're somewhat behind on. Periodization, to me, we could look at it as a way of organizing training in an integrative, sequential way. Now, the problem that we see right now is people are confusing periodization with programming. So periodization is kind of like the Google Earth view, mm-hmm. and programming is the street view. So, for example, think of periodization as a scaffolding from which everything is built. So in an annual training plan, let's say I'm working with an NFL team. I know what the NFL season is next year. So I know where I need to be competing. I know who I'm competing against. I can then create difficulty scores and create based on historical data, based on distance traveled, based on strength of schedule. I can then rank those competitions and say who's strongest and who do we need to, modulate training in a certain way. Can we train through it, or do we have to reduce training? So I could set that framework for the whole year. That's periodization. From there, we plan by deciding what models of training that we might use, and that might be a sequential model, that might be a parallel model, it might be a emphasis model. And simply all that is how we're going to organize the training factors that we're going to actually employ to get to this end product of competition and the schedule. So the models are dictated by the periodization structure that we've outlaid, or the scaffolding. Mm-hmm. Programming is the modes and methods that we use to basically operationalize the planning model. And this is where I think people get a little confused. It's not Moses with the tablets at the programming level. The plan is pretty straightforward. Is going to be parallel, sequential, or emphasis. The periodization model is pretty straightforward. I can't say I got to move the competition today because I just not ready. It doesn't work that way. I wish it did, but it doesn't work that way. And so when we look at the programming level, there's this great scope for malleability or pliability. An example I always give is, let's say I got a rugby player, and let's say I have my lock or my hook. Let's use my hooker, excuse me. So the hooker is the guy that kind of hooks the ball when they scrum. Mm-hmm. And let's say that this week we want to make sure we're targeting leg strength, and that's primarily a goal for us that's established by our periodized plan, yet his back is injured. Obviously, the best way to build leg strength is squatting. We know that. He can't squat. Oh God, what do we do? Well, we go down the list. All right, we're going to leg press. We can still build leg strength. Is it perfect? No. But does it accomplish our goal? Yes. So we can move things in and out as needed depending on the changing status of the athlete. And my wife used to have what she called the what I want to do, what I need to do, what I have to do, oh shit, I'm screwed list. And that's how she would present it to her head coach, is like, we're going to do this if we can. If they can't do this, we're going to do this. If they can't do this, we're going to do this. If we're at this point, then they probably shouldn't play this week. And that to me is how periodization is. And I think right now what people are really struggling with is they're saying periodization is programming. It's not. And periodization informs the programming decisions. Are they interrelated? Yes, but they're not synonymous. And if you think about it, this is a debate, an argument that has been going on for over 50 years, because Verkhoshansky and Matveev used to have this argument back in the 60s.
So it's one of those things like in the putting industry or the putting instruction field where the argument forever has been, does the putter go straight back and straight through, or does it work on an arc? And I argue with people. I say, well, it just depends on where you're looking at it from. If you're looking at it from down the target line, it's going to look like one. If you're looking at it from above, at directly above the target line, it's going to look like one. But if you look at it on the plane that the putter is moving on, it's going to look like it's straight back and straight through. So the argument has gone on forever because it's right. Both of them are right. So I would have to imagine some way, shape, or form, someone, like you said, that they're two parts of a whole. So they're both correct, but they're arguing that the one is different than the other.
Yeah, absolutely. And everything is about the framework or the optics that you look at it at, you know, and I think that's where right now, if you go on social media, you see all kinds of weird things about periodization. And my question to people that question periodization is, okay, what's our viable alternative? Because I know as a coach, let me hang my sports science hat on the hook on the back of the door of my office and put my coach hat on. As a coach, I know how to get someone ready for a competition. And there's a plan and a structure. It's not random training for random's sake. So from that perspective, from a scientific perspective, please tell me an alternative, and there is no alternative. There's a research group in the United States that's written at least 5 commentaries on the uselessness of periodization. And every time when I read them, I ask the question, okay, let's go with the framework that it's useless. What what do you suggest we do? There's never a suggestion because there is no other suggestion.
Yeah, just someone trying to make a name for themselves, most likely is what it is.
Or someone who hasn't coached. Again, one of the things I think is important, and Mike Stone did this with all his grad students, and it's a testament to how great he is and also a curse at the same time. Every one of his grad students were required to compete in something. Usually it was weightlifting. Every one of his grad students were required to coach. Usually it was in athletics or football. So you were a strength coach as well. And every one of his grad students were required to do research because he believed, and I have kind of taken on this belief as well, that in order to truly understand how to work with an athlete, you must know, one, what it feels like to be an athlete, two, what it feels like to coach an athlete, and three, how to investigate things. And if you can do that, then I think you have a better chance of being someone who can bridge the gap between science and application. And that's the NSCA's mission. And I think we do a pretty good job at it. Could we do a better job? Obviously, yes. But from my perspective, that's what we have to do. We're an applied profession, and really the outcome is really performance and athlete success, not how many manuscripts that we actually create.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was some discussion on the Golf Channel. I don't know if you guys get it all the way down to Western Australia. Brandel Chambly, who of course seems to irk some people, but I find his input quite enlightening sometimes. But he was saying that most of the best teachers, golf instructors throughout history, had also been very good players in their own right. Butch Harmon played the PGA Tour, Jim McLean, and he went down this list. And it was to what you're speaking of, that most of the guys who were and women who were very good instructors were also very good players, and most of the guys who were good instructors but sometimes weren't perceived to be at that the most elite level were more into science and theory, but had not maybe applied it at some of the highest levels the way that the others did. And that was his argument.
Well, I think that's important. I will throw a caveat out. I don't think you have to be the very best player, because what we find sometimes with the truly exceptional athletes are born that way sometimes, and they can't explain or don't understand why they do what they do, and they can do things that other people can't. I often find it's the mediocre athlete, the one who has to work really hard and figure out how to do things, that tends to have that bridging capacity at a greater level. But I do think doing things is important. So most of my grad students train with me. Most of them will coach in some capacity as best we can in the Australian environment. We don't have the opportunities like Mike Stone has at his university to engage students in the athletics department because we don't have athletics departments. In fact, there's no athletes on campus, so it's a challenge. I think that's really important. One of the things I think that it does do is, if I have been an athlete, I understand what it feels like to be an athlete. I understand what competition feels like. I understand pressures of success and failure. I understand the feeling of a taper, what's going on in a taper physiologically, but also perceptually. And when as a coach, then I can say to an athlete, I am tapering you this way. You will feel this way, but don't worry, on the day you're going to feel this way. And that better come true. You don't say things that don't come true, but if it does come true, then the athlete has a heck of a lot more faith in what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. They've taken that step, that blind step.
Correct. And I think too, with the coaching perspective, one of the things that Mike really beat into us was that there's a great responsibility with being a coach or a mentor to elevate that person, because they're putting their trust and their faith in you. And I think doing these different elements in your preparation as an applied sports scientist are essential. I mean, I have wonderful colleagues at ECU. Some of them are what I would call mechanistic sports scientists. And you sit there and they're lovely people, and you're like, dude, that's not going to work. You can't do it that way. I mean, our biomechanist and I got into a massive debate one day about how an outside linebacker runs when they're rushing the quarterback, and he wanted them to stand upright more and be more mechanically sound for running. And I'm like, you're going to get killed when the left tackle hits you because you're upright. I was like, I know what an outside linebacker feels like if they stand up too high. They get crushed. And so I think those kind of connections build capacity to help build credibility. Because you come in and you say things like that as a scientist, the athletes are like, this guy's an idiot, and that's the same thing in the military. If I were to go in and say, no, you need to do your hostage rescue strategy like this because it's more sound, they would shut off and not listen to a damn thing I say from that point on.
Yeah, that speaks to the development of trust. How do you develop that? And I actually had Randy Soma, who is a former president of top 50 Fortune 50 corporation. We did a whole podcast on that, and and talking to you, I mean, you need that in everything in life, right? You have to have trust, or anything built upon fibs or white lies. I mean, it's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, and that's the thing about being genuine and being honest, and admitting you don't know something is not a bad thing. If you then take the effort to find the answer. It's one thing to admit I don't know something and do nothing about it. And in periodization, that's the thing. I was at a talk one time, and there was a fella on the stage at the NSCA who said periodization didn't work because not everybody wins. And I just kind of cocked my head and was like, well, that's a strange statement, because let's be honest, in sport, the construct is there's winners and losers. Not everybody's going to win. If everybody wins, then it's not really competitive sport, it's recreation. And the way I would frame it with periodization is that periodization increases the potential of being successful. It is not a guarantee of success, because the human can find a way to screw it up.
Yeah, exactly.
We're not robots. And in fact, I have a colleague here at ECU that he believes in a theory he calls building the robot. And I'm like, but we're not robots. And we can't break ourselves into individual components and say, if I build this tendon or this muscle group, then it's going to be put together with this. It's a dynamic, fluid, multifaceted system that's self-regulating. And periodization is a way to just organize things to manage that person's training in order to guide them towards some outcome. And if you think of it in that simplistic of terms, it's not that complex from a systems perspective. Where it gets complex is the art of the programming side of things. And where do you put certain things within the training plan to maximize the benefit? And that could be very individualized.
Yes, I would say, and the higher you go, the higher the athlete is, the more important that is. For example, in golf, you got to play well at the right time. You could shoot 61 and 65 all day with your friends at home, but if you go to a PGA qualifying tournament, or you go Monday qualify, or you're at a tournament itself and you can't break 70, well, that's not doing any good.
Yeah. Well, we actually have a saying in our weightlifting team. Everyone's a champion on Instagram.
Right.
and I don't care if you do a 15 kilogram PR on Instagram if you don't do your best at the national championships. It matter. It means nothing. Yes, you'll get your likes and people will follow you and things. I guess that has a value. But for me, if you're trying to make the Olympics, it doesn't matter. So the reality is the periodization construct is a way of trying to say, all right, where do I need to be my best? Where do I not need to be my best? And where can I prepare versus where do I need to reduce the preparation in order to be the best I can be? I think if anybody's watching the World Cup of Rugby right now, last week the All Blacks turned it up a notch and basically decimated Ireland. Well, it's very clear that they had been basically, prior to that time point, they were in a different gear. They were training still very hard, and now they've turned it up a gear to make a run into the finals. And this weekend when they play England, it should be quite an exciting engagement, because these are the two best teams in the world at the moment. so the structure of whatever they're doing has to change in order to increase their chances based on what the competition demands are. And there's some really interesting work by some researchers in Australia, Sam Robertson and David Joyce, that have looked at this idea of tactical periodization is what they've called it, but really it's just emphasizing when major competitions are based on data.
Have you used the periodization and the programming with many golfers in Australia, or even when you were in the States?
Actually, golf is not something I spent a lot of time with. I mean, we did some golf research. When I was at West Virginia, we got really interested in ground reaction forces and how they relate to club head swing speed. And so we did a paper looking at mid-thigh pull testing to measure, obviously ground reaction forces such as rate of force development, peak force, isometric impulse, and things like that. And what we found that there was a relationship to my ability to put vertical force into the ground into relating to that club head speed. So we had an interest of that because I had some grad students that were interested in that space when I was at West Virginia. So we were interested in trying to say, how could we take Olympic weightlifting as the center of our force production paradigm and use that with golf? Because we know weightlifting, to me, is probably one of the best tools for athlete development because it leverages a multi-joint dynamic system development that seems to underpin a lot of sports performance. It's not that we're not going to do other things like rotational movements and things of that nature, but we use this as our centerpiece. And then we build the elements outside of that. So with golf, we were interested in, okay, let's define if our core belief system actually related to this performance capacity. And it did. And it was very interesting to us. And then we were going to go down the track of doing more in that space, but then I was recruited to come to Australia and basically had an opportunity to come to Edith Cowan University. And I took that opportunity just to have an experience. And I have to say, I truly believe everyone should live outside their own country at one time in their life. I think you definitely grow as a person. You grow intellectually, you grow spiritually, you grow emotionally, because people do things differently around the world, and it doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just different, and you start to appreciate things a little bit differently. You appreciate what you love about your home country, but you also look at other ways of doing things that could be quite beneficial.
You had mentioned being at West Virginia. That was we had a short correspondence back then. Where we were talking about your working ground reaction forces, and you were at the time I was telling people that were training in the area, or anyone that would listen to me, I said, you're wasting your time trying to kneel on a Bosu ball or balance disc. If you want serious strength and you want to develop your core, you need to be doing squats and deadlifts. And it was so nice to hear someone at your level say that, because it's like I was working against the grain on all that stuff.
Well, it's actually really interesting right now. We see it a lot in sport right now. It's like, to me, you have a few rocks in strength and conditioning that you hang your hat on. We can't discount the benefit of squatting. I do find it somewhat interesting that some of the fastest people in the world all squat above 2.5 times body weight. The best jumpers in the world tend to squat above 2 times body weight. People who get injured less tend to squat above 2 times body weight. Look at Christian McCaffrey from the Panthers right now. He's lighting it up. He's one of the strongest guys in the lower body, according to Lauren Landau, that is out there. Look at Shaquan Barkley, how strong he is in the lower body, and look how good he is as a running back. Even some of the quarterbacks are pretty strong, with the exception of Tom Brady. The vast majority of everyone else is in this more strength dependent kind of perspective. So we know that that's like a construct that we need. It doesn't mean we're not going to do unilateral training, but it's in addition or as a supplementary. And we know that, core exercises like the deadlift, the power clean, push press, bench press, things like that, those large mass exercises have benefit. But what I think where people fail is in the actual implementation of those exercises, not understanding how to load them correctly to either stimulate recovery or stimulate adaptation. Because when you do use whole body exercises, the metabolic cost is much higher. So people default to this more bodybuilding or building the robot mentality of single joint exercises. And it's not saying that single joint exercises don't have their place, but they shouldn't be the core. They're not the rocks of your conditioning or strength program. And one of the things that I think from a periodization perspective and a programming perspective where people struggle is that, yes, those rocks are important, but you're not training weightlifters. And we see a lot of our students are like, oh, Dr. Haff likes weightlifting, so let's just do all weightlifting exercises. No. We're going to use the tools of weightlifting to do certain things. And how you put that together is somewhat of an art form. And I think as you become older and more experienced, you become more judicious about how you program. When you're young, you tend to have way too many exercises, way too many things being done at one time. And as you become older, you become more streamlined and more efficient. You can get away with less done well. The trick is that there's an evolution in the athlete's development from a periodization perspective. When we work with younger athletes, they can use more parallel models where they do everything at once. As they become more trained, we start to shift to block or sequential, which is block training, or emphasis modeling, depending on the sport, because they need more emphasis or time in a certain attribute. When you're a novice, almost anything you'll do will get you better. And if you look at a lot of the research that starts to tear apart some of the periodization constructs, the studies that are done that tend to basically say all periodization models are the same tend to be done in novice athletes or untrained people.
Yeah, a young training age in particular.
Absolutely. And this is where it gets really interesting. So like earlier, I said that my wife was a strength coach in professional netball. So in Australia, professional netball is probably the top sport for women at the moment. It probably won't be in the next 10 years, but right now it is. It's the place where the best female athletes go. And they are extremely skillful at the sport of netball, which is kind of like a hybrid of basketball and handball. She went in with an American strength training ethos, and the training age, strength training wise, was probably that of a freshman in high school. Yet these are professional athletes. Mm-hmm. And so she had to pare it back to things that she did with freshmen in high school in the United States. And she dropped the injury rate of that professional netball team because netball has one of the highest injury rates in sport in Australia. They had two contact injuries, in 2 years. That's it. Because they got stronger. They were trained to be more efficient and do things better. And so I think that's the other thing you have to think about is periodization models. It's like a tasting menu. It depends on what you need and where you're trying to go, and you pick what you need.
Yeah, I've had a number of very good trainers, strength coaches, holistic practitioners, and so on. And the consensus has been there is no doubt that strength training that supports increases in speed in the golf swing. Would you tend to agree with that, or do you have a view on that one?
Absolutely, I think so. And I think good strength training will do it even better. I think the trick is you don't want to be a strength athlete who's trying to be a golfer. You're a golfer who's using strength training to be a better golfer. So you're building athlete. The way I look at it is I look at a golfer as an athlete. I want to make them the best athlete they can be so that the golf coach can make them the best golfer they can be. My job as a strength coach isn't to make a golfer. It's to give the coach the tools to make them a golfer. And I think that's a little bit different construct. My wife used to have this argument with the assistant coach on the netball team who later fired her when the head coach quit. She would say, I'm not building netball players. I'm building athletes who play netball. Mm-hmm. And that was my wife's ethos, and I agree with it completely. There's this idea that there's a special program for a netball player, a golfer, or a football player. No, we're building athletic attributes that underpin sports performance.
Can a golfer get too strong for golf? In other words, some of these guys on the PGA Tour are doing, 400-pound deadlifts or 450-pound squats. Is there a law of diminishing returns? And I guess the second part of that question would be, when should training focus shift from strength training to force development?
So I guess for me, the first thing is I hate when people say people are strong enough, because I don't well, my first question is, what is strong enough? And no one has an answer to that. Stone and I talk about this a lot. And it also goes with the assumption that strength is a static quality. Strength is constantly in flux. And so the idea that you could be strong enough, to me, seems illogical. I often use as a counter to that statement. So if we're fit enough, we'll stop conditioning. And every coach I've ever talked to is like, oh no, we lose fitness. Why do you think we were not going to lose strength? Strength goes up and down. So are we ever truly strong enough? No, but we have to think of it in a different construct. So Buckner published a paper in the 90s in Health and Wellness that later on Suchamel and Nymphius and Stone kind of hijacked, that there's a curve of the relationship between strength and frailty. And so this idea that you're trying to bank into what we call a strength reserve, and that strength reserve is kind of like your bank account that you're trying to put money into. So when you train to be strong, you're banking strength so that when the time that you shift to power, you have this reserve that you can draw upon. That reserve is not indefinite, just like your bank account is not indefinite, unless you're Warren Buffett. His is probably indefinite. But for most of us, there's only so much money in the bank account. And if we're not putting money in, we're taking it out, and that reserve is going to go down. Same thing I believe with strength. So should we focus on being strong? Yes. But we have to modulate the emphasis of strength, maintenance, or slight gain, depending on where we are in the training year and what we're trying to accomplish. Now, there is definitely a law of diminishing returns, which is interesting because the people who are against periodization say that there is no such thing as a law of diminishing returns. Fundamentally, the law of diminishing returns is that in order to continue to get gains in X or whatever, in this case strength, you have to put in X amount more time to get it to go up. As you get to the upper echelons of strength, whatever that may be for your sport, there's a point where you don't have enough time to put in to get stronger. And the commitment to get stronger is so great that it's not worth having that much commitment. So then we shift into what I would call striving to maintain strength. Not that you're strong enough, but you're still striving to maintain it, which means you're still engaging in it.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Would it be similar to, let's say a golfer is, let's say that they're kind of, they're to the point where they're doing a 300-pound squat, back squat. And as you say, in order to get up to 350, they're going to have to put a hell of a lot more time than maybe they go 2 a days or whatever. And obviously they can't do that while they're trying to play a pro schedule. So would it benefit them more to start training speed where they're doing 300 pounds, but they're doing it at a faster rate in a full range of motion?
Well, I think you still would strive to be strong, but you're going to always modulate your training stimulus. And this is where I think it kind of boggles my mind. People kind of get into a rut where they just do the same things all the time. We know that adaptation and recovery are stimulated by variations in training intensity. So your training intensity is going to change over time and change in different ways depending on the schedule and the program that we put together. For example, in an emphasis periodization model, I might be in a block where my focus is on certain aspects of golf performance, like hitting the ball, as far as I can. And let's say I'm going to dedicate a lot of time to that or a lot of time to putting. So then I might shift into a maintenance phase for strength for a month. And then I come back and say, all right, now that I've worked on that, I want to get stronger again. And then I'm going to go back and work on putting again, because we know in technical sports that we have to learn how to use that strength in order to have it translate. So sometimes, for example, let's say basketball, we worked with the professional basketball team in Perth, the Wildcats. So when they get stronger, if they don't practice shooting with that strength that they develop, shooting becomes difficult because the timing of it's off.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got to blend those two things. So we may have periods of time where we might do 3 days a week of strength training and 2 days a week of putting, or we might shift it to 3 days a week of putting and only 2 days a week of strength training. So we're shifting what we're emphasizing. So there'll be times for building strength, times for maintaining strength, times for building reserve, time for depleting reserve. And I think that's where people get a little bogged down when they start to think about training theory. They think of it when they hear me say you're never strong enough. Oh, we're just going to grind to be strong all the time. No. We have to contextualize what we're doing within our periodized plan. Yes, when I'm in the preparatory period and I'm not competing, yes, I want to get as strong as I can because I want to bank that strength for later. Because there's things that I can do if I'm stronger that I can't do if I'm weaker. When we look at plyometrics, Melissa Hardin just did a wonderful figure that's been quite popular on social media from an article that we all co-wrote with Tim Suchamel about plyometrics. And what her and I worked on together, and we're a dynamic team together. It's one of my favorite people in the world to work with, is we came up with the idea that there are different strength levels required for different plyometric activities. So for example, if you want to do box jumps, depth jumps, things like that, you probably need to squat 2 times body weight to offset the eccentric loads. You could squat less than 1 times body weight and do things like skipping and hopping and jumps in place. Why? Because they're lower intensity plyometrics. We've never said that you need to squat above 1.5 times body weight to play hopscotch, because kids do it every day.
Right.
To maximize the benefit of repetitive plyometrics and high intensity plyometrics, you need to be stronger because your turnaround, your shortening cycle is more effective then. So what she's working on, and I think it's really exciting work, is trying to find out the thresholds of strength necessary for different plyometric activities. And in talking with Jimmy Radcliffe, he believes similarly that there are thresholds for different plyometrics. So is strength important? Yes, because it allows me to program things that are more aggressive and different and give me more benefit. And I think that's something that when people hear me say you're not strong enough, they're like, oh, he just wants people to be strong. No, I want them to be strong to open up the capacity to do other things like potentiation complexes, accentuated eccentric loading, different kinds of plyometric activities, because those benefits of those exercises lead to performance benefits in sport.
Do you find that, let's take a golfer, for example, because flexibility and mobility are almost equally as important as strength, depending on who you ask, I would say. But I would say across the board, most strength coaches and trainers and body people would probably agree that you need a fair balance of those things. So how would you utilize that? Let's say for a golfer, would you maintain their flexibility when they're increasing strength by doing the full range of motion, or does their stretching program have to increase to correlate to their weight program? How do you go about doing something like that?
Well, the first thing is I think all periodization programs need to be integrated on multiple levels. So it's not just about strength training. It's about, golfing. In the golfer example, it's about nutrition. It's about recovery. It's also about motor learning. And it's also the physical. The physical is the construct of all the conditioning and all the strength training, the metabolic conditioning, the mobility, and all those things. So I think we have to integrate everything, and that's where I find the periodization, and I call it the puzzle, very interesting, because each person needs a different puzzle, even though they're trying to get to the same outcome. But when we start to think about mobility, I will go on record, and I'm pretty confident saying this is the area that I think strength and conditioning coaches are the poorest at. We do not, as a profession, in my opinion, spend enough time in that space, because range of motion is critical, because full range of motion lifting activities are critical. They are better at translating to sports performance, in my opinion. I don't believe in isolation motions. I believe in multi-joint dynamic systems, and that's why I like the weightlifting. Yes, multi-joint exercises can help you, done through a full range of motion, can help you with mobility. But I am a true firm believer that you need a structured flexibility training program, especially as athletes age. A lot of people don't realize that for me, I actually started out in gymnastics. Between the ages of 8 and 12, I was a gymnast, but I have been, I'm 5'10" now. I've been 5'10" since I was 11. And the problem for me is I was too tall to be a gymnast, and I used to be able to do splits and all those things. And what I found now that I'm 50 is that the number one problem that I have is mobility and range of motion. Because if we look at athletes, what is the first thing they skip in training? Their mobility training program.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, mobility training has got threefold things. One, it allows me to be more effective in my lifting technique because I could do things in mechanically correct movement patterns. Two, I do believe it has an effect of allowing me to have a range of motion that will be beneficial for my sports performance. And three, even though the literature is pretty clear that flexibility stretching does not decrease injury, I believe that being mobile decreases injury. So I've got to be mobile. And I actually have, in my older age and actually in my younger age as well, I do like yoga as a training activity. I like it for the mindfulness, and I like it also for its ability to improve ranges of motion. The trick is with yoga is trying to figure out how to quantify the workload that it has in the context of your training program. So I think we need structured mobility programs. And what I know as we age is that we lose mobility, especially if we're sedentary and we sit. For example, I pretty much sit in front of a computer all day long, and I've lost inordinate amounts of range of motion. Mm-hmm. So it's an ongoing battle. And if you look at, countries where, for example, in the Asian countries, they have a toilet that's a little bit different. You have to squat all the way down. They tend to have a better full range of motion and squatting motions than Westerners who sit on a chair, basically. So for me, I think mobility is critical. I think it should be practiced on a daily basis, and not only as a warm-up activity, but as a session in and of itself for recovery and maintenance of range of motion.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I mean, I when I was playing, whenever I trained, I tried to make sure that I was doing stretching almost equally as much. The last thing a golfer wants is to be too rigid, right?
Oh, absolutely, because you lose your fluidity then.
Yes.
One of the things, though, is interesting. I actually have one of my weightlifters who's an ex-gymnast, and one of the things we've talked a lot about is long hold stretching, because the classic paradigm is 30 seconds is all you need. And he was talking about how he's a coach in gymnastics and he's also a national champion gymnast, is that to truly change range of motion, he's talking about 3-minute holds.
That's Pavel Tsatsouline. I can't pronounce his name. The Russian former yep. KGB guy, trainer.
Spetsnazi, the kettlebell guy.
Yes.
Yeah, he talks about that as well. And mm-hmm. The Russians were the Russians are excellent at gymnastics, and my gymnast actually learned it from a Russian coach.
Yeah, and the theory that I was told on the 30 seconds is that's how long it takes a type 1 and type 2 A and B and even the type 2C to relax into the stretch. And I said, well, if it relaxes, why not relax it for a minute or longer?
Well, I think the thing is it's the timing of the stretching, and this is a place of great debate amongst the staff here at ECU, because we do have one researcher who thinks static stretching should be done to prep for dynamic performance, and I disagree. Unless range of motion is a limiter to your performance, then you have to do the dynamic stretching or static stretching, because we know that static stretching done before power performance reduces power output. There's thousands of studies on that. But when we're doing a structured stretching mobility program, long holds are actually quite important to change range of motion, but also following it up with dynamic movement as well. So I actually like with my athletes on days of non-lifting, and this is with weightlifters, obviously, is to use mobility, static stretching and dynamic mobility as a recovery training session. And I think that's quite beneficial for them, because in weightlifting, much like golf, there's a rhythm and a range. Mm-hmm. That if you don't have good range, you can't get into the positions you need. And if you can't maintain the rhythm, you can't do the lift effectively. So golf is not different in that perspective. It's a little bit different in the aspect of the type of mobility that you need. Obviously, thoracic mobility is critical, especially in a rotational sense. But I think that has to be structured. And I think in the strength and conditioning profession, if I was going to say the place that we're probably the weakest is in that space.
Yes, it seems to gravitate towards the barbell or the dumbbell. And then as an afterthought, oh yeah, by the way, make sure you stretch for 15 minutes before you leave tonight.
Yeah, I think so. And this is, for me, it's kind of the evolution of me, I guess, because it was kind of interesting when I was in college as part of my sports science training at East Stroudsburg University, we were required to take yoga, which I found fascinating and I enjoyed. And I got quite mobile. And when I got with Mike Stone, he's kind of anti-stretching because he believes it reduces force production and all those things. And what I found over time was that while I agree with Mike that it does reduce force production and power output when done before training, the lack of mobility through ranges of motion that can happen from not doing appropriate mobility training has some ramifications that can be negative that outweigh potentially any loss in force production. And that's just my opinion. It's not something that Mike and I will agree on. But I believe that to have effective range of motion is critical, and especially in today's society.
Absolutely, especially and then even injury prevention.
Yeah, totally. And the thing is, what I find is athletes who are stiff and don't take care of their body range of motion wise tend to get injured more frequently. Now, is it because stretching or mobility training reduces injury or range of motion reduces injury? It's kind of the chicken or the egg kind of question. All I know is that as I became more stiff and less flexible, the more injuries I had.
Mm-hmm. In talking to Preston Green, and he was on the last episode I had, he said one of the precursors for injury when he tests people is they're not flexible. He says that and looking at kids who are going to be very good athletes later on, he said one of the things to check is for flexibility. So if a kid's flexible, chances are they're going to go very far if they stick in the sporting world, and they're going to be more or less injury free.
Yeah, I mean, I develop weightlifters here at ECU, and right now, the guy that my wife and I have taken the farthest, he has a gymnastics background. He wasn't a very successful gymnast because he's 6'1", but he's got range and he tends to be rather robust. And weakness is his weakness, which is a strange statement for a weightlifter. That's easy to fix. Because all we have to do is keep working on our craft. The mobility, I think, is a little bit more challenging because I don't think anybody enjoys doing 4-minute holds.
Right.
And I can honestly say I do it and I hate it. But I find that when I do it religiously, I have a better mobility for my training. So I think it's about structuring programs, and I think we need to do a better job in the development of strength coaches to make them more knowledgeable about how to plan and structure mobility sessions and flexibility sessions, which are slightly different.
Yeah, and you take a guy like Dmitry Klokov, who is just jaw dropping to watch some of the things he can do strength wise. But then what's almost as impressive is you watch maybe on YouTube or somewhere else, someone might see it. Some of the stretches he does, it's like the guy's, how can you be that limber or that flexible and that strong simultaneous? But he is.
Well, I can tell you, for example, in China, I do some consultation with Chinese weightlifting, and which is a great honor to be able to do that because that's a very special place to go. They do every morning. They all get together and do mobility work every day. And they do it for an hour to 2 hours. And if you look at the Chinese and their ranges of motion and their strength, it's phenomenal. And you don't see the technical flaws in their lifting that you might typically see in Western athletes because they have the mobility to get through ranges of motion. And so the idea that being strong and muscular is going to reduce mobility is kind of a falsity in the sense that if you maintain your mobility training, it's not going to be a problem. I think that's going to be an important thing.
What do you see in the strength conditioning field that has changed the most since you got started?
What's changed the most? I think the technology. Um, I think technology is important. Don't get me wrong. So I don't want to be an anti-technology person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think people are relying on technology to do the coaching instead of the coaching doing the coaching. Um, for example, my wife has got this down from a coaching perspective. If she were to walk into the gym and look around, she has a relationship with every one of her athletes that she coaches so that she can immediately know just by how they're moving, in communication with them, if something's not right. I think a lot of coaches today use monitoring to dictate training instead of inform training decisions. Monitoring should feed into the coaching intuition, not tell the coach what to do. My wife she wanted to make a cartoon a couple years ago for an article we were writing with a computer with a hat on it that said coach, and then all the coaches sitting around and hats on saying assistant coach. Because I think we've lost the art of coaching. If you look at like a John Wooden or a Pete Carroll or a Bill Parcells, they have a gift to coach or manage people. And Norma Plummer as well from Australia. And yes, they use metrics and data to make decisions, but it's not the metrics telling them what to do. We see it a lot here in Australian rules football. The sports scientist will actually tell the coach how much they can train the athlete. And I've always found that strange, because just because a metric says something doesn't mean we shouldn't train. And the analogy I would use is, I'm coming up to the gold medal match at the Olympic Games. The monitoring says that I'm not ready to compete. I can't walk up to the Olympics and say, we're not ready to compete today. We can't train or compete. It doesn't work that way. So the question I ask people that use monitoring to pull people from training continually is, when do I practice overcoming adversity and not feeling well? In the classic coaching sense, we'd push them and use our coaching eye to pull them back, not just say, monitoring says you can't train today. And this readiness to train kind of construct is just perplexing to me. I think that's the biggest change, because we don't build resilience by overcoming as much as we used to.
Yeah, that kind of tends to a question I ask most people, and just based off our discussion, I suffice to say I'm going to know your answer, but the question is always, is failure a good thing?
I think failure is a great thing. I don't think you should train to failure in the weight room because it doesn't maximize your benefit. Mm-hmm. But failing is not a bad thing. You learn more from failure than you will ever learn from success. Being humbled is an amazing thing. I know when I first got with Mike Stone, our relationship was contentious at first. Two alpha males, two very strong personalities, and he had to humble me greatly, and he did. And that humbling for me actually made me grow more as a scientist and an athlete than any successes that I might have had. So I think it's important to push the boundaries. And in sport, I truly believe that incredible things can happen if people believe they can do things. And if you if you link people to, let's say, monitoring in this example, to the belief that if monitoring says X, I can't accomplish Y, then I believe we're putting limits on that athlete. And if we think about it, right, the 1980 Olympics is a great example of this. So the 1980 Olympics, the U.S. hockey team versus the Russians. If you went on purely what everyone thought and everyone believed, there's no way the U.S. should have won at all. Yet they were able to accomplish something, even though prior to the Olympics, they got decimated by the Soviets. Yet they beat the Soviets in the Olympic Games because of sheer will, and obviously good preparation as well. But no one believed that they could do something. A similar thing happened recently in the Commonwealth Games. Australia is a powerhouse in women's netball. They are the best in the world. And no one thought that England could beat them, and England beat them on Australian soil. They're not as skillful, but they're better prepared strength-wise. So I think that we have to structure training at times where athletes are challenged outside of their comfort zone to grow, not only physically, but confidence-wise.
Well, I think that goes back to your book, right? If I remember it correctly, and I haven't read it in a couple of years. It's sitting right here on my desk. But on the specialization at a young age, that the kids who specialize early obviously excel very quick, but they really never learned how to overcome adversity. And when they had a lot of adversity because other kids had caught up physically later on, then they didn't know how to handle it. And by I think age 20 usually, they were completely out of the sport.
Correct. And it's interesting because there's this idea of there's certain sports where you have to specialize early. Let's just be honest. Gymnastics is a prime example. But if we look at like the best NFL players, a lot of them have a multifaceted background of basketball, track and field, and football. And they're more well-rounded as an athlete. And we look at long-term athlete development pathways. We can see very clearly that this more multilateral training is necessary at a young age, and sampling many sports and sampling strength and conditioning. And Rodri Lloyd, Avery Fagenbaum, Greg Myers, John Oliver, these guys are the best in the world at this. And we all agree on this. I'm lucky enough to be able to hang out with them and talk about this construct. The idea here then is that from a periodization perspective, the novice athlete needs a parallel model where they do everything. They're not specializing in anything. They don't need to be on a sequential training model. They need to parallel model to build a wide physical literacy that underpins performance. My background as an athlete, by no means was I a great athlete. I never really achieved what I probably should have, but I did gymnastics. I did baseball. I ran track. I played American football. I was a weightlifter. I was a track cyclist at one point. I tried all these things, and that basically gave me a better physical literacy for what I chose to specialize in, which was weightlifting. Now, if I could go back in time, after I retired from weightlifting, I became quite enamored with track cycling. I would have probably done that as a younger person. I probably enjoyed that more than weightlifting in some aspects. But I think that big, broad base is necessary.
Yeah, and many in the U.S. now, I mean, parents are pushing to specialization too early, and it's like, I just sit there and look at it. I say, are you out of your mind? It doesn't work. You're doing it ass backwards.
Well, I think what it is short-term games and at the cost of long-term success. And I can design a program to get you good really quickly, but that doesn't mean that you're going to be good in the long run. There's in the book, and also in Stone's book, there's an inverse relationship to the rate between the rate of gain in performance and the ability to sustain that performance. So the faster you gain, the shorter you will be able to maintain it. So this longer, very methodical kind of way of training is really the approach of building components. It's much like building a house. You got to build it in components in a systematic way.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said before. It's not a secret. This stuff has been around for decades and longer.
Oh yeah,
like people don't want to listen to it.
Well, I think this is something that we talk a lot about. It's kind of interesting for me because I'm at the same age that Mike Stone was when I first started to work with him, and obviously he's much older now. And we talk about this a lot, this idea that for some reason, people seem to think nothing happened before the year 2000. and it's problematic because if I look at my good friend K.O. Hakkinen, who I'm completely honored to call him a friend because he's a legend. If I look at the work he did in the 80s, it's amazing. And you have to consider that they didn't have computers to do everything. They did the statistics by hand. They had to be more creative in the design of their studies and the methods that they used in order to get the answers that they were searching for. nowadays it's because of technology. I think we just push buttons and we don't always understand what we're looking at. But back then they had to really think things through a lot more. Because it wasn't easy to get data. Now it's like I could throw a GPS on somebody and calculate a bunch of stuff. But is that really science? Not really.
Mm-mm.
It's not science. So I think that's something that we have to be cognizant of right now. There's the scientific literature is being flooded with really, in my opinion, not well done research, and it makes it very difficult for the practitioner to know what's noise and what's actual good.
Yes, for someone that likes to follow you and other people as a hobby, it is getting very noisy and hard for someone who's not in it, like myself, to differentiate between what are you supposed to do.
Absolutely, and the thing is, for me, right? A lot of academics start companies on the side and do things, consulting and things like that, and I find it challenging because sometimes I wish to do that, but then other times, I have Mike Stone whispering in my ear from my shoulder saying, well, that ruins your credibility because you have to change things in order to stay marketable. Because really the basics aren't sexy and they work amazingly well. The basics done really well is more beneficial than anything, but people seem to be looking for this magic bullet that's going to change everything.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that magic bullet is simply hard work and persistence. If you work hard enough, long enough, you'll be successful.
I think Elon Musk mentioned something about that. If you work 100 hours a week, you're going to double the output of someone who's working 50 hours a week.
Yeah, it's interesting. If I'm a big fan of Steve Jobs as well, and he has an interview where he says that you have to love what you're doing so much that when other people would quit, you don't, because
Mm-hmm.
what you're doing is so insane that you just have to live on your passion for it. And I think that's the other thing is there's this falsity that the strength and conditioning profession is this sexy, amazing profession, and it's an amazing profession, but it's a grind. It's a grind because you're serving athletes and you're working with athletes to make them better. And it's not about you, it's about them. And that's why I truly love Jimmy Radcliffe as a human and as a strength coach. A lot of people don't know this, but I don't mind sharing it. The 3 years I was president at NSCA, I tried to give Jimmy Lifetime Achievement Awards, and every year he wouldn't accept it because he didn't believe that he was warranted of such an award. And to me, I was like, well, Jimmy, why? And he's like, because it's not about me, it's about my athletes. And that to me embodies what I think we should be. Not how many Instagram followers we have or Twitter followers. Let our athlete success speak for us. Because you mentioned Jimmy Radcliffe's name, everybody knows who he is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody. He's a legend, but he doesn't do social media and he doesn't self-promote.
Yeah, it takes a special kind of a human being to be like that. They don't. It's not someone you're just going to find a dime a dozen.
No, I mean, but Mike Stone is the same. If you think about it, he doesn't do social media, doesn't promote himself. He is what he is, but everybody knows who he is. So I think that to me is kind of the central theme when you're starting to try to build your career is like, what kind of person do you want to be?
Mm-hmm. What are you most proud of?
Most proud of?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know at this point. I mean, I think I'm very proud of my grad students when they're successful. One of the guys that my first grad student, Dr. Steve Rossi, who's at Georgia Southern now, I'm really proud of his accomplishments because when we were at Appalachian State together, everybody thought he wouldn't make it. And he embodied the idea that I'm going to work hard and I'm going to work long and I'm going to be a good person. And he ended up getting a PhD from Oklahoma State and then now is an associate dean at Georgia Southern, which is quite an accomplishment. I'm proud of people like him. From the NSCA perspective, I'm I'm proud of what we did when I was president at NSCA. We tried to make a difference in the profession. One, we tried to internationalize so that we would be a broad-based organization that respects people from around the world. I think that was the first thing that we did. The second thing that we did is I'm proud of the fact that we tried to raise the bar of the profession in the sense that the 2032 target of making it so to become a strength coach accredited or certified by the NSCA, you have to go to an accredited university is a massive step in the profession. I think it's one that's long overdue, and I'm proud of the fact that I was able to, with an amazing board, make a very, very tough decision to go that direction. We'll see how it works out. Maybe 20 years from now, I think it's the dumbest idea on the planet. But I truly believe that we have to become a more credible profession. So I'm proud of the fact that I was able to work with people to realize that belief for the profession. And I think finally, I'm proud of the fact that, myself as a human being, that I was able to sacrifice myself in a large way to lead the NSCA. It was not an easy thing for me to do because I was the first president to ever reside out of the country. And the amount of traveling that I did to try to heal the organization was extraordinary. Literally, I traveled outside of Australia every 3 weeks for 3 years.
Jeez.
I put in inordinate amounts of hours, and I was still able to mentor my grad students, still able to produce research, still able to be a positive influence for change. And I'm proud of that, and the fact that the NSCA is an amazing organization. I know it's beat up by people in social media, and there are a lot of people there that are just trying to do a good thing for the profession. And I'm proud of the fact that I had the opportunity to be in that position for a short amount of time and make a difference. And it's a humbling experience to lead that many people. It's a rewarding experience. I didn't think I'd like it. Actually, after the first 6 months, I had a conversation with Mike Stone on the phone, like, would it be a bad thing if I quit? And because it was so hard. And I think that one of the things that really helped me achieve those accomplishments that I'm proud of with the NSCA was the fact that I was able, and I think I'm the only president who's done this, I leveraged the past presidents as my support group. So if I needed guidance, I would reach out to these, in this instance at this time, these gentlemen who walk the path that I am walking to get their guidance. And I can say that they were amazing. Bill Kramer, Mike Stone, Boyd Epley, Dan Wathen, and many, many more. But they were amazing people to reach out to. So I was proud of the fact that I was able to bring these past presidents back into the organization and make them feel important and engaged again, because they are important and they should be engaged.
Mm-hmm. They have the experience too. And what I don't know why someone wouldn't want to use them.
I think people want to go their own path. And I am a firm believer that to go my own path, I have to know what paths were taken before.
Mm-hmm.
And know why things failed or were successful before. And I think it's important to be true to who we are. And one of the things that we did when I was president of NSCA was we went back to what we are. We are about strength and conditioning. That's who we are. So why are we not trying to be that? And I think that's important. So yeah, I'm pretty proud of that. I'm proud of my students. I'm proud of the NSCA presidency.
I mean, you should be. You do, from what I've seen, and I'm an outsider. I mean, your work is incredible. You should be proud of those things.
Yeah.
What do you do to unwind or decompress?
That's a great question. I think lifting in and of itself is kind of almost like a religion to me. It's a place where I go to be myself. I do yoga periodically. I have been very bad at that lately. I've been a little bit too busy to go. My yoga partner, my wife, she had spinal fusion surgery, so she hasn't been able to
Oh,
go. And it's not the same without your partner in crime. I often call my wife my spotter in life, and she hasn't been able to do it. So I've been kind of bad because I don't like doing it without her. I do like to cook. If I wasn't a professor at this point, I think I'd go be a chef. I like to create food because I like to eat food, um, a lot of food. But those things, and I definitely like. Right now, I like politics, and I don't know why. I find the world a very interesting place at the moment.
It's very
And
entertaining, to say the least.
I wouldn't use the word entertaining. I think it's very scary.
Yeah, yes, you're correct.
I'm a student of history, and especially World War II and the rise of Nazism is scary to me, and I see a lot of parallels in the world at
Hmm.
the moment. Um, I don't agree with that stuff at all. And so I do follow politics a little bit, and I do love reading. I am fascinated by what makes people successful. So for me, I spend a lot of time pleasure reading things in that space. Um, just totally fascinated by that. There's like if I could sit with three people right now whose books I've read to just talk, Jocko Willink, I would love to spend a day with him, just talking about his beliefs and what he does, and even do a training session with him maybe.
Hmm.
I would love to spend a day with General James Mattis. I find him to be fascinating. And I would totally want to spend a day with Bill Belichick. I find him a fascinating individual. If I couldn't get Bill Belichick, I'd go with Bill Parcells. Um, but I find those people interesting, and I find their stories interesting. So I tend to be a voracious reader. I think that's important. I wish I had more time to read research. I don't read as much as I used to due to the construct of the job that I have at the moment, which is more administrative than anything. Um, but yeah, definitely reading, cooking, yoga, lifting, and I do a little bit of cycling as well.
It's interesting you said about General Mattis. I live not very far from Paris Island, meaning
Yeah, I
20
know Paris
miles.
Island.
And yeah, and I was fortunate enough to work with the Marine golf team for the all military championships on a few occasions, and hanging around the team and talking to them, um, and staying in touch with them and so on. I had asked him about General Mattis, and there was not one person that ever said one bad thing about him.
Oh, he's a soldier's general. I mean, I was talking. So we have a whole military division that we're building here at ECU, and I'm lucky enough that I'm one of the key people in that. We have the former vice air marshal from Australia here, and he's the head of the division, and he's actually friends with James Clapper, General James Clapper. They're
Hmm.
friends, and he was telling me that Mattis is probably the most respected general in the United States military by the troops. And a lot of it has to do with, I think, the Marine Corps ethos in the sense that if you read Simon Sinek's books, he talks a little bit about the Marine Corps
Yep.
and their belief on leaders eating last.
Yep. I think
And
that was the name of one of his books, wasn't it?
it was one of his books. And
Yeah.
General Mattis's belief system is that uh, that the officers are no more important than the soldiers, the grunts. And in Iraq, he actually did not, if you read his book, allow the officers' quarters to be transported. They were required to sleep with the troops in the ditches. And so, even when my dad was alive, he used to praise Mattis constantly. He was very happy before he passed away when he heard that Mattis would be uh, in the White House because he thought that was important. In fact, I think he was most happy that most of the people in the White House at the time, early part of the Trump presidency, were all Marine Corps generals,
Hmm.
and that their ethos is just very different. It's one that, while I didn't get to serve, and I wish I had, that ethos is something that was instilled upon me by my father. And I think he's an amazing guy. I would love to spend a day with him and just chat and just talk about things, about leadership, about all kinds of things. I think those are important things. So I enjoyed reading his book quite a lot. I'll probably read it again. I have a list of books that I think are just quite amazing that I often recommend to people.
What, looking back on your career, what would you tell the young Greg Haff, let's say that was Appalachian State, and that you would look back and tell him, and would he have listened to what you're telling him?
Probably wouldn't have listened because he was a dumbass. I think the biggest thing is a couple things. One, don't take things personally. One of the hardest things you have to learn, and I think especially in today's society, people question everything. It doesn't mean they don't like you or you have no value as a person. I think that's a key thing. From an athletic perspective, like as an athlete, I would basically do three things. One, get your diet in shape and stop being a dumbass eating fast food. Be smart about your food choices and fuel your body appropriately. Two, listen to Mike Stone when he tells you to do something. Because I often wanted to charge and do my own path. I think too, I would say spend more time with your parents. I kind of went out and did my own thing early in my life, and then before you know it, you're older and your parents are no longer here. I think there is in our profession, there's a difficulty in maintaining connection with family, and I think I would tell myself to do a better job there. From a research perspective, I would have said to myself, do what you do, but learn some other skills, like spend more time diversifying. Don't be too focused. And think of your education more as building a toolbox instead of getting through something. I think we all kind of put our head down and go down a path. And Mattis had a wonderful quote recently at the dinner in New York City last week, where he talked about listening to other people because they might be right sometimes. And I think that sometimes when I was younger, and even maybe now today, I tend to be very confident in what I believe and sometimes don't listen as well as I should. And it's something that I work on every day to be a better listener and a better in that capacity. But I would have informed myself back then to do that as well.
Just getting back to what you had said about getting out and doing things and maybe not appreciating what you had at the time, and then before you know it, it's 25 years gone by. I had asked the same question the second interview I did the third interview was a retired U.S. Marine Corps Colonel, Drew Smith. And one of his answers was, don't put so much focus on attaining something that you neglect the things that are most important to you. And it kind of got into, don't chase achievement in your profession and neglect your family in the process.
Yeah, I think the thing is, for me, and I don't know where I learned it, and I don't know who taught it to me. It has to be my father or Mike Stone. They're pretty much synonymous with each other in a lot of ways. For me, it's about trying to improve myself every day in some way. And every night I fail in some way. Like, for example, sometimes for me, just getting nominated for an award by someone who took the time means more than actually winning the award. And so it's not about recognition. It's about becoming better. And because you could be recognized in many ways for good or bad. and to me, it's about the people that are closest to you, like I can tell you that I can do a talk and there could be 1,000 people in the room. And if Mike Stone's sitting in the chair, the only person I'm worried about in that room liking it is Mike Stone. Because if he doesn't like it, I'm going to find out about it. And I'll share a story with you. It didn't happen to me, thank God. Last year at the NSCA conference, Dr. Tim Suchamel was doing a talk. And Tim is an up-and-coming young guy. He's got a little bit to learn, but he's a good kid. And Mike Stone did not like his talk. So Mike whipped out his phone and started texting him in the middle of the talk.
Jesus.
About how this wasn't going the way it should. And Tim came off the stage. He's like, what do I do with this? And I just started laughing, going, don't do dumb things. Because in a way, a lot of us, we look to those that are closest to us. If the people closest to us don't like what we're doing, then it's very likely that people that are distant from us don't like what we're doing. And I use my wife as a barometer a lot of times. If my wife tells me I'm doing something stupid, I know I'm doing something stupid. I have a colleague here at ECU who I adore. She's an amazing researcher, an amazing human, Dr. Chrissy Kendall. And I tell her all the time, I was like, if I'm going down the wrong path, please reach out, tell me. I'm not going to be offended, and that's about collaboration and trusting people around you. And so the people that are close to you are probably the most important people. I think probably a challenge for me is taking downtime. I went 1 year without a single day off in an entire year. I have in a lot of ways taken on some of the worst attributes that Mike Stone has as well, in that sense, because we're just trained to be this way. And it's a challenge for me. So
what are you working on now? What's next?
Well, I'm writing a new periodization book without Dr. Bompa. I wasn't asked to collaborate with him on his latest edition, which was okay. It got me my own book deal with Human Kinetics, so we'll have our own book. Hopefully, we'll get that done by March. If I don't, my editor is going to kill me because I've had to push it once already. So I'm working on that. I'm getting into genetics and how genetics could be used to modulate training with a really great researcher named Simon Laws and Dr. Kendall. So that's something we're doing. I'm trying to just get up and do better by myself and my students, and do the family thing, and that's pretty much it.
That's a full plate. If somebody wanted to reach out to you to do a presentation or lecture or come learn more from you, apprentice under you or anything like that nature, how would someone get a hold of you? What's the best way to do that?
Well, you can find me on Twitter. It's at Doc Haff, Doc _Hoff. And my Instagram is the same, at Doc Haff. My email is at ECU, which is G.Haff at ecu.edu.au. That's usually the places you can find me. I will always be at the NSCA conference in July, 100%. Haven't missed a single one since 1995. Don't intend on missing in the near future. In Australia, I am often at the Australian Strength and Conditioning Association conference, and I try as I can to be at the United Kingdom Strength and Conditioning Conference every year. That one's a little bit more challenging because resources to fly around the world are not unlimited at the moment. It gets quite expensive to go back and forth to the U.S. and to England from the UK, from Perth, which a lot of people don't realize is the most isolated city in the world.
Yeah, we got to get you back to stateside sometime.
Actually, I'm going back on when do I leave? Early December. I'm flying out to initially to go visit Duncan French at UFC to do some work with him. And then from there, I'm going to Mike Stone's conference at East Tennessee State University, which is, I believe it starts on the 6th of December, 6th, 7th, 8th, or something like that.
Well, so I will be.
Yeah, it's I highly recommend if your listeners want to go to a good not major organization conference, Mike Stone's conference at ETSU is a really good one to go to. It's a very intimate and very engaging, sharing kind of conference.
All right, so if everyone listening hear that, sign up, keep an eye out for it and sign up.
Oh, it's a great little conference, and you get to see, Mike's 72. He's been doing this for 50 years, and he's still doing it at a high level. And to see one of the true masters is an amazing thing, and he's truly iconic. And to even be compared to him in any way is an honor beyond belief.
Well, I'm pretty sure you're going to be filling those shoes one day.
I don't know. I don't know if anybody can, but we'll give it a good crack.
I have no doubt that you'll accept the challenge. Doctor, I can't thank enough for your time and for putting up with my reschedules multiple times and tech challenges, even more than gracious on all accounts. I can't thank you enough.
It's a pleasure. It's not a burden at all. It's always fun to talk about what you've done and how other people can benefit from your mistakes.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to today's show. If you enjoyed it, you can find more information on today's episode and other topics at golf360.blog. There you'll find the show notes and links related to this episode, as well as any other episode that we've done so far to date. If you're interested in improving your game and would like to learn more from yours truly by taking a private lesson, a half-day or multi-day school, club or putter fitting, you can reach me through the blog site or by email, pete@golf360.blog. So some of you may be asking, what is the golf paradigm? All you have to do is click on the homepage while on my blog site to discover how you can start playing better than you ever thought possible. Or you can simply sign up, again, on the blog page for my instructional videos where I give regular tips on all areas of the game to include the swing, club design and fitting, health, fitness and nutrition, the mental aspects, and equally as important, the integration of all those things together. I'm also on social media, and you can find me at The Golf Paradigm. That's PARADIGM. And I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, also under the same name, The Golf Paradigm. Facebook is usually the best way to reach me for questions and or comments, and I look forward to hearing what all of you have to say.